My dad laughed first. Not a warm laugh, sharp, performative. He pointed at the handmade gift in my hands and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "Poor mom with cheap gifts, that's what you brought." My brother followed, lifting his wrist so the lights caught his Rolex. "Some of us can afford a designer," he said. My mom stared at the table. My daughter's face burned red, embarrassed for me. I didn't say a word. What they didn't know, what I'd learned to keep quiet after years of being the family's afterthought, was that silence had become my armor. I didn't wear labels. I didn't announce wins. Power doesn't always need an audience. Then my phone buzzed. Once, twice. I stepped aside to take the call, expecting a wrong number. Instead, a calm voice said, "Ma'am, this is Vogue. The editor-in-chief would like to discuss your diamond collection." Conversations stalled. Smiles froze. My dad's color drained as he realized the room had shifted, and not in his favor. I grew up learning how to disappear so others could shine. Tonight I wasn't going to correct anyone. I was going to let the truth walk in on its own and watch what happened next. The grand ballroom of the Hartwell Hotel was a vast space hushed and gilded under the light of crystal chandeliers. My father had rented the entire space for his annual Christmas charity gala, an event he hosted every year to remind everyone in our Connecticut social circle that Richard Ashford had made something of himself. Self-made, he liked to say. Started from nothing, built an empire in commercial real estate. What he never mentioned was the inheritance from my grandmother that funded his first property deal, or the connections my mother's family provided when he was just a hungry young man with ambition and no contacts. History in my father's version always began with him. I stood near a tall window overlooking the snow-dusted gardens, holding the gift I'd spent 3 weeks making. A hand-carved wooden jewelry box with intricate inlay worked the kind of piece that required patience and skill I'd developed over years. Inside was a vintage photograph I'd restored my parents on their wedding day, colorized and framed in reclaimed mahogany. To me, it meant something. To my father, it was evidence of my failure. "Claire, come here," my mother had whispered when I arrived, her eyes already apologetic. She wore a Chanel dress and pearls that probably represented a quarter's rent for my Brooklyn apartment. "Your father's in a mood tonight. The mayor canceled at the last minute." I should have known then. When Richard Ashford felt slighted, someone had to pay for it. That someone was usually me. My brother Marcus stood at the center of a group of admirers, his wife Helena draped in diamonds beside him. He'd inherited our father's height, his confidence, and his talent for making everything look effortless. At 38, he ran the Ashford Holdings Development Division and drove a different luxury car each month. Tonight it was a Tesla, though he made sure everyone knew about the Porsche waiting in his garage. "Claire finally made it," Marcus announced as I approached my daughter Lily. "We were starting to think you'd gotten lost. How far is that apartment of yours, Queens, right?" "Brooklyn," I corrected quietly. "Bay Ridge." "Same thing," he waved dismissively. "The outer boroughs all blend together." Lily squeezed my hand. At 12, she was old enough to recognize the dismissal in his tone, but young enough to still be confused by it. Why did Uncle Marcus talk to Mommy like that? Why did Grandpa never ask about her school, her friends, her life? I didn't have good answers for her. I only had the truth in this family. I had always been the footnote. The gift exchange happened after dinner, a tradition my father insisted on despite the forced nature of it. One by one, family members presented their offerings. Marcus gave our parents a week at a resort in the Maldives. Helena contributed a rare bottle of wine from some exclusive French vineyard, and my mother received a designer handbag from my father that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Then it was my turn. I held out the wooden box, and I watched my father's face transform. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked almost like disgust. "Did you make this?" he asked, turning it over in his hands. "Yes. The wood is from that oak tree that fell in Grandma's yard. I thought, thoughtful." He interrupted, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Very thoughtful." He set it aside without opening it, and the message was clear, not worthy of his attention. That was when he said it, loud enough for the donors and socialites gathered nearby to hear, loud enough to ensure maximum humiliation. Poor mom with cheap gifts. That's what you brought. The laughter rippled outward like a stone dropped in water. I felt it wash over me, the pity, the amusement, the second-hand embarrassment from strangers who didn't know me, but now knew exactly where I stood in the Ashford hierarchy. Marcus lifted his Rolex. Some of us can afford a designer. More laughter. My mother looked away, her silence a betrayal I'd grown accustomed to over the years. And Lily, my beautiful, sensitive Lily, turned crimson with shame that wasn't hers to carry. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain that the box represented 60 hours of work, that the technique I'd used dated back to the 17th century, that similar pieces sold in galleries for thousands of dollars. I didn't mention that the jewelry I designed and crafted had been featured in exhibitions across 3 continents, that collectors waited years for commissioned work, that my name carried weight in circles my father had never entered. I said nothing, because I had learned over 34 years of being Richard Ashford's daughter that explanations were wasted breath in a room where the verdict had already been rendered. Then my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, a New York area code I didn't recognize. I stepped away from the cluster of amused onlookers, expecting a wrong number or a spam call. Ms. Ashford, Claire Ashford. Yes. This is Miranda Chen calling from Vogue. I'm reaching out on behalf of our editor-in-chief regarding your Meridian Diamond collection. She's very interested in discussing a feature. Would you have a moment to speak with her this evening? The world contracted to the size of that phone call, the sounds of the gala fading into white noise. Vogue, the editor-in-chief. My diamond collection, the one that had taken 4 years to complete, the one currently valued at $20 million and displayed in a private exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum. I can speak now, I said, my voice steady. I looked back at the ballroom as Miranda transferred the call. My father was accepting congratulations on the gala's success, his humiliation of me already forgotten in the glow of social approval. Marcus was laughing at something Helena whispered, probably another joke at my expense. My mother was smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her dress, her avoidance practiced and precise. And Lily stood apart from all of them, watching me with eyes that held too much understanding for a 12-year-old. I smiled at her, a real smile, the first genuine one of the evening, and lifted my phone slightly. It's okay, I mouthed. Because it was okay. It had been okay for years, actually. They just didn't know it yet. My father's color drained as conversations around him began to shift. A few guests were checking their phones, whispering to each other, glancing in my direction with expressions that looked nothing like pity anymore. The truth had a way of revealing itself, I'd learned. You didn't have to announce it. You just had to give it room to breathe. Tonight the room was about to get very large. The call lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes that contained more genuine professional respect than I'd received from my family in 3 decades. The editor-in-chief spoke about craftsmanship legacy, the intersection of traditional technique and modern design. She mentioned collectors I knew, exhibitions I'd attended, a world that existed parallel to my father's ballrooms and charity galas, but rarely touched them. When I returned to the main hall, something had shifted in the atmosphere. It was subtle, a slight hesitation in conversations, a few prolonged glances in my direction. The laughter from earlier had dissipated, replaced by a tension I recognized but couldn't quite place. My father noticed it too. I could tell by the way his shoulders stiffened, the slight narrowing of his eyes as he tracked the room's energy. Richard Ashford had built his career on reading rooms, on knowing when the current was flowing in his favor and when it had turned. "Who was that?" Marcus asked, appearing at my elbow. His tone was casual, but I caught the edge beneath it. "Important call. Work-related." "Must be some work." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What was it you're doing again? Some kind of craft thing?" I didn't answer. Lily had rejoined me, her small hand slipping into mine with the fierce protectiveness only children can offer their parents. "We should go, Mom," she said quietly. "It's getting late." She was giving me an exit, I realized. My 12-year-old was reading the room better than my 42-year-old brother. "You're leaving already?" My mother appeared, her face arranged in what she probably thought was maternal concern. But we haven't had dessert yet. Your father ordered that chocolate fountain you liked when you were little. When I was little. As if I was still that child still trying to earn approval through good behavior and gratitude. We have an early morning, I said. Please thank Dad for including us. I didn't seek out my father to say goodbye. He was holding court near the bar, surrounded by men in expensive suits who laughed at his jokes and agreed with his opinions. I'd spent too many years orbiting that constellation to voluntarily return to it now. In the car, Lily was quiet until we crossed into Brooklyn. Then, "Mom, why does Grandpa talk to you like that?" I'd been waiting for this question, dreading it if I was honest. "Your grandfather has a certain way of seeing the world," I said carefully. "He values things he can measure money status recognition, things I don't always provide." "But you do important work. Mrs. Patterson says your jewelry is in museums." I smiled. Lily's art teacher had recognized my name from an exhibition catalog and mentioned it during parent-teacher conferences. It had been awkward explaining why I preferred to keep my professional life separate from my family connections. "It is," I agreed, "but Grandpa doesn't know much about that world, and I've chosen not to tell him." Why? Because every success I ever shared became ammunition. Because my first gallery showing was dismissed as a hobby. Because when my work was accepted into the Smithsonian's American Design Collection, my father asked if they were paying me anything for it. And when I said no, he laughed and said that proved his point about impractical careers. Because sometimes, I said instead, the best way to protect something precious is to keep it away from people who don't understand its value. Lily considered this. "Like that story about pearls and pigs," I laughed, surprised. "Something like that." That night after Lily was asleep, I sat in my studio surrounded by the evidence of a life my family had never bothered to discover. Workbenches lined with specialized tools, display cases holding pieces in various stages of completion, a wall of photographs showing my work in galleries from Paris to Tokyo to Sao Paulo. The Meridian collection had taken 4 years. 12 pieces each incorporating ethically sourced diamonds with traditional metalworking techniques I'd studied under masters in 3 countries. The exhibition at the Met was scheduled to run for 18 months, already extended twice due to demand. $20 million. That was the appraised value. My father's entire real estate portfolio was probably worth less. I hadn't told him. I hadn't told Marcus or my mother or any of the aunts and uncles who gathered at holidays to celebrate the Ashford legacy, as if it was something earned rather than inherited. Partly it was self-protection. I remembered too clearly what happened when I shared good news, the dismissals, the qualifications, the inevitable comparison to Marcus's accomplishments, that always left mine looking trivial. But there was something else too, something harder to admit. I hadn't told them because I wanted this one thing to belong entirely to me. No Ashford name attached, no father's connections were leveraged, just Claire the artist, the designer, the woman who'd built something real while everyone assumed she was failing. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but the message made the sender clear Miranda from Vogue again. Confirming our call tomorrow at 2 p.m. The EIC is very excited about the profile. A profile. In Vogue. I thought about the gala, the laughter, the carved wooden box sitting forgotten on some table. Poor Mom with cheap gifts. Tomorrow they'd know. The article wouldn't mention my family. I'd made that clear years ago when journalists started asking about my background. But the world would know. And in our circles, word traveled faster than wildfire. I texted back a confirmation and went to bed. In the morning, I woke to 17 missed calls from my mother. When I called back, she answered on the first ring. "Claire." Her voice was strange, too controlled the way she got when something had rattled her carefully maintained composure. "Your father wants to know what happened last night. People have been asking about you, about some kind of exhibition." "What people?" "The Hendersons, the Chens. Margaret Whitmore called this morning to ask if we knew about some diamond collection." She paused. "Claire, what is going on?" I looked out my window at the Brooklyn skyline, gray and ordinary and completely removed from the world where my family measured worth. "I don't know what you mean, Mom." "Don't do that. Don't pretend. Your father he's confused. He says someone mentioned Vogue, that there might be an article. There might be. Silence. Then, about you. The disbelief in her voice should have hurt. Maybe it did somewhere beneath the layers of scar tissue I'd built up over the years. Yes, Mom. About me. But you... She stopped recalibrating. Why didn't you tell us? Because you never asked. Because you laughed at my gifts and dismissed my work and made it clear that anything I created would never be worthy of Ashford attention. It never came up, I said instead. My Tuesday began at 5 in the morning, the way most of my Tuesdays did. The light in my studio was best before sunrise, soft and neutral, perfect for examining the subtle variations in metal that artificial lighting could never capture. I was working on a commission for a collector in Dubai. A necklace incorporating traditional Yemeni filigree techniques with modern geometric design, the kind of piece that required steady hands and absolute concentration. I'd been refining this particular skill for 15 years, studying under masters in Sana'a, and later in Florence developing a style that critics had called unexpectedly revolutionary and a bridge between worlds. My family called it Claire's little jewelry hobby. At 8, I made breakfast for Lily and helped her with homework that had somehow migrated to the morning hours. She was studying ancient civilizations, currently fascinated by Egyptian jewelry and its symbolic significance. Mom, did you know Cleopatra's favorite stone was emerald? I did. The Egyptians believed emeralds represented fertility and rebirth. Mrs. Patterson says you should come talk to our class about historical jewelry techniques. I smiled, pouring her orange juice. Maybe someday. She says you're important, like actually important. The words hung in the air between us, a child's simple assessment of a truth that had somehow never penetrated the walls of the Ashford compound. After dropping Lily at school, I returned to find 3 emails that would have seemed incomprehensible to anyone who knew me only as Richard Ashford's disappointing daughter. The first was from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, confirming dates for a traveling exhibition of my early work. The second was a contract renewal from Cartier, who had licensed one of my designs for their heritage collection 2 years ago and wanted to extend the arrangement. The third was from my attorney confirming the legal structure of my latest business acquisition, a small workshop in Antwerp, where I'd apprenticed as a young woman, now run by the daughter of my late mentor. I signed what needed signing, responded to what required responses, and turned my attention back to the Dubai commission. At noon, my phone rang. Not my personal phone, my business line, the one that connected to my studio, rather than my life as Lily's mom and Richard Ashford's invisible daughter. Claire, it's Dominic. Dominic Valenti was one of the most respected auction house directors in the world. We'd met at a Christie's event 7 years ago, when a small piece of mine had unexpectedly tripled its estimated price. I'm calling about the Vogue piece, he said. Miranda mentioned they're doing a full profile. I wanted to make sure you're prepared for what comes after. What comes after? The attention. He paused. You've managed to stay remarkably under the radar for someone at your level. That's about to change. I looked around my studio, the careful anonymity I'd cultivated, the barriers I'd erected between this world and the one where I was still the family disappointment. I know. The Meridian collection alone would have put you on the map, but a Vogue feature, at your price point. He laughed, not unkindly. Your wait list is about to get very, very long. After we hung up, I sat with what Dominic had said, under the radar. It was true. I'd deliberately chosen obscurity over visibility, private collections over public acclaim. Part of it was temperament. I genuinely preferred the work itself to the recognition. But there was another part, the part I rarely examined too closely. I'd kept myself hidden because I was afraid of what would happen if my family found out the truth. Not that they'd try to claim credit, though. Marcus certainly would. Not that they'd demand a cut, though my father would probably joke about it. I was afraid of something more fundamental. I was afraid they'd find a way to diminish it. My father had a gift for that. Every achievement, every success, every small victory, he could shrink them down to nothing with a single comment. That's nice, dear. That's what he said when I told him my first piece had sold. Just that. That's nice. And then he'd turned to Marcus and spent 20 minutes discussing some real estate deal that would generate actual revenue. but I wasn't 23 anymore. I wasn't the girl who dropped out of business school because the numbers made her eyes blur and the lectures made her soul ache. I wasn't the young woman who chose apprenticeship over inheritance, who walked away from the Ashford legacy to chase something everyone told her was impractical. I was 34 years old. I had built something real, and in 3 weeks, the world would know it. My mother called again that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father called. I let that go too. Then Marcus, which was unusual enough to make me pause. My brother didn't call me, ever. We communicated through holiday gatherings and occasional family group texts, the kind where he'd share photos of his latest vacation, and I'd respond with polite emojis. I didn't answer. An hour later, a text arrived from my mother. "Your father is very confused. Please call us back. We'd like to understand what's happening." What's happening? As if my career was a sudden event rather than 15 years of work they'd chosen to ignore. I responded with 4 words: "I'll call tomorrow. Busy." Then I turned off my personal phone and returned to the Dubai commission. The filigree work required absolute focus. Each tiny wire had to be shaped precisely, soldered with invisible joints woven into patterns that looked delicate but could survive centuries. It was meditative, this work. It demanded presence. There was no room for family dynamics or wounded feelings or the complicated ache of being overlooked. At 3 o'clock, I picked up Lily early for a doctor's appointment routine. Nothing serious, and we stopped for ice cream on the way home. "Mom," she said, chocolate dripping onto her coat, "are you nervous?" "About what?" "About Grandpa knowing? About everyone knowing?" I considered the question honestly. "A little," I admitted. "Not because I'm ashamed, but because I know they'll have opinions." "Grandpa always has opinions." "He does. And Uncle Marcus," she made a face. "He's going to say something mean. He always does." I wiped chocolate from her chin. "Probably. But you're not going to let them make you feel bad, right? Because your work is really important. Mrs. Patterson showed us pictures of your stuff at the Met. Everyone thought it was so cool." My daughter, 12 years old and wiser than anyone else in my family. "I'm not going to let them make me feel bad," I promised. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat with the email I'd been avoiding all day. It had arrived at 4 o'clock, sent from the editor who was handling my Vogue profile. "Claire, just wanted to give you a heads up. We've confirmed the photographer and scheduled the shoot for next week. We've also received some inquiries about your family background. Apparently someone connected the Ashford name and reached out asking if there was a personal angle we could explore. I've shut that down per your request. This piece is about you and your work. Full stop. Looking forward to next week." Someone had connected the dots. Someone in my father's circle, probably curious about why a magazine like Vogue would care about Richard Ashford's daughter. The inquiries would continue. The connections would multiply. By the time the article is published, there would be no more hiding. Good, I thought, surprising myself with the certainty of it. Maybe it was time to stop disappearing. 3 days before the gala that would change everything, my father hosted a smaller family dinner. "Just us," my mother said on the phone, which meant the Ashfords without spouses, without children, without the buffer of outsiders who might witness the unfiltered version of our dysfunction. I brought Lily anyway. She was my buffer now. The dinner took place at my parents' home in Greenwich, a 6-bedroom colonial that had been featured in Architectural Digest back when such things still impressed me. My father had bought it 30 years ago with money he always described as hard-earned, conveniently forgetting the inheritance that made the down payment possible. Marcus was already there when we arrived, settled into the leather chair that had always been his, holding a glass of whiskey that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Helena had begged off some charity event she couldn't miss, which meant it was just the 5 of us. My parents, Marcus, me, and Lily, who sat on the edge of the sofa, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "So," my father leaned forward, his executive bearing fully engaged. "Tell us about this Vogue business." "I'd rather not." "You'd rather not." He repeated my words flatly, as if they were evidence of some moral failing. Your mother gets calls from half the women in her book club asking about your jewelry collection, and you'd rather not discuss it. There's nothing to discuss, Dad. I have a career. It's going well. A magazine wants to write about it. A career? Marcus snorted. Since when last I heard you were making trinkets in that little apartment in Brooklyn? Studio, I corrected. And it's been my career for 15 years. The silence that followed was thick with recalculation. I watched my father's face as he processed this information, watched him trying to fit this new data point into the narrative he'd constructed about his disappointing daughter. 15 years, he said slowly. And you never thought to mention it. I mentioned it. At Sarah's wedding, at Marcus's 40th birthday, at Christmas 3 years ago when you asked what I was doing with my life. You said you were doing art. I said I was designing jewelry, high-end pieces for collectors. You laughed and asked when I was going to get a real job. My father's jaw tightened. He didn't remember, of course. Why would he? My career had never been important enough to remember. Well, my mother smoothed her napkin, her universal gesture for diffusing tension. We're all very happy for you now. Aren't we, Richard? Of course we are. He didn't sound happy. He sounded like a man who'd discovered a variable in an equation he thought he'd already solved. Though I have to say, Claire, the secrecy feels a bit dramatic. We're your family. I could have argued. I could have pointed out every dismissal, every joke at my expense, every time he'd made it clear that my choices were not worthy of Ashford attention. But what would be the point? He wouldn't remember those either. The gala is Friday, Marcus said, changing the subject with his usual grace. Dad's big night. The mayor confirmed this time. So I heard. You're bringing Lily. He glanced at my daughter with the vague disinterest he always showed her. Should be quite an event. Dad's announcing the new Children's Hospital wing. The Children's Hospital wing, another monument to Richard Ashford's generosity, funded by a tax-deductible donation that would ensure his name remained on a building long after he was gone. We'll be there, I said. Later in the car, Lily was uncharacteristically quiet. You okay? Uncle Marcus didn't even look at me. It was like I wasn't there. I know, I'm sorry. Does he not like me? My heart cracked just a little. Uncle Marcus doesn't like anyone who doesn't serve his purpose. It's not about you. She considered this. That's really sad. For him, I mean. It is. Mom. She turned to look at me. Are you going to tell them at the gala about everything? No. But if Vogue is writing about you, won't people already know? Possibly. The article was scheduled to publish the day after the gala. The timing was coincidental, but the universe seemed to have a sense of poetry about these things. But I'm not going to announce it. That's not why I'm there. Then why are we going? I thought about it. I really thought about it. The gala was everything I'd spent 15 years avoiding: the performance of wealth, the hierarchy of status, the endless measuring of worth by external markers. I could have skipped it, claimed illness, sent a gift, let my absence be another mark in the column of Claire's failures. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the phone call from Vogue. Maybe it was Lily's face when Marcus ignored her. Maybe it was simply time. Because, I said finally, I'm done hiding. The article draft arrived by email 2 days later. I read it 3 times, looking for anything that might connect me to my family, anything that might give them a way to claim credit or involvement. There was nothing. Claire Ashford. The piece read, has built one of the most respected names in contemporary jewelry design through sheer dedication to craft. Her work, which commands prices in the 7 figures, has been acquired by private collectors, major museums, and even royal families. 7 figures. The words sat on the screen like a declaration of war. My phone rang. My father's number. Claire. His voice was different now, cautious, almost tentative. I've been doing some research about your work. Have you? The Metropolitan Museum, Cartier, the royal family of Jordan. He paused. Why didn't you tell us? Because you never asked. Because you laughed every time I tried, because you made it clear that nothing I could achieve would ever be enough. It wasn't relevant, I said. Not relevant, Claire, this is. He stopped recalibrating, trying to figure out how to process information that didn't fit his model of reality. Your mother and I would like to talk. Before the gala. We feel there may have been some misunderstandings. Misunderstandings, as if decades of dismissal could be reframed as a simple communication failure. I'll be at the gala, Dad. We can talk then. I hung up before he could respond. That night, I sat with Lily, and we looked at the photographs that would accompany the Vogue article. My work displayed in museums around the world, my hands shaping metal into something beautiful, my face calm and focused and completely unknown to the world where Richard Ashford's name meant power. You look happy, Lily said, pointing to a candid shot from my studio. Like really happy, not like when we're at Grandpa's. I am happy when I'm working. Is that why you kept it secret, to protect the happy, children see everything? Yes, I admitted. I didn't want them to make it less. She nodded, understanding in a way that made her seem much older than 12. Grandpa makes things less. That's what he does. Sometimes, but not anymore. Because the secret's out. Because I'm not going to let him. The gala was in 2 days. In 3, the article would be published, and everything I'd built in the shadows would finally step into the light. They thought the gala was about status. I knew it was about timing. The grand ballroom was even more elaborate than the Christmas gala my father had clearly spared no expense for his hospital wing announcement. Abstract floral installations of silver branches flanked the entrance. Waiters in white gloves offered champagne on silver trays. I wore a simple black dress that I'd made myself, the fabric draped in a way that suggested expense without announcing it. Lily wore navy blue, her hair pulled back in a style she'd chosen herself. We looked exactly like what we were, people who didn't belong in this room, but had been summoned anyway. Claire, my mother appeared immediately, her smile bright and brittle. You're here? Good. Your father wants to speak with you. Later. He's been very interested in your career. He has questions. I'm sure he does. My father held court near the main stage, surrounded by the donors and socialites who formed the core of his social empire. He was in his element, expansive, charming, the benevolent patriarch, distributing his attention like a prize. I watched as he laughed at something the mayor said, as he clapped Marcus on the shoulder with obvious pride. Marcus, the golden child. Marcus, who had never had to prove himself because approval was his birthright. Mom, Lily tugged my hand. Can we sit down? We found a table near the back, away from the main action. I was used to this kind of visibility, close enough to count too far away to matter. The gift exchange happened after the speeches, just like at Christmas. This time I'd brought nothing handmade, just a simple card with a generous check inside a donation to the children's wing in my parents' name. Safe, impersonal, impossible to mock. But Marcus wasn't done. No carved box this time. He appeared at our table with a glass of wine and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was hoping for another demonstration of your artistic talents. Just a donation. How practical. He sat down uninvited. Dad tells me Vogue is writing about you. Something about jewelry. Something like that. Funny. I did some research myself. Couldn't find much. Just some listings on secondary auction sites. A few mentions in trade publications. His smile widened. Nothing that would interest Vogue. Maybe they're interested in something else? I said. Like what your charming personality. He laughed. Come on, Claire. We both know what this is. Some junior editor probably connected the Ashford name and thought there was a story. Dad's daughter living in Brooklyn pretending to be an artist. He leaned closer. It's embarrassing, honestly. You should tell them to kill the piece. No. His eyebrows rose. You want the whole world to see what a disappointment you are. Lily's hand found mine under the table. I felt her squeeze a silent message of support. I think, I said carefully, that the whole world might see something different. Marcus's expression flickered confusion, then irritation. Before he could respond, our father's voice boomed across the room, summoning everyone's attention for the official gift presentation. What happened next was choreographed to maximize humiliation. My father opened gift after gift from donors and family members, each one announced and displayed for the assembled guests. Then he reached my card. "And this," he said, turning it over without opening it, "is from Claire. No announcement, no display, just a brief acknowledgement before moving on to the next package." Someone behind me whispered something I couldn't quite hear, then a laugh quickly stifled, then more whispers spreading outward like a sudden change in air pressure. "Mom," Lily's voice was small, "people are looking at us." They were, not with curiosity or interest, but with the particular brand of social pity reserved for those who had been publicly diminished. Poor Claire. Still can't get it right. At least she tried. Marcus caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass in a mock toast. His smile was triumphant, victorious in a competition I'd never agreed to enter. My mother stood beside my father, her face arranged in careful neutrality. She hadn't defended me. She never did. And Lily, my beautiful, sensitive daughter, was watching all of it with an expression that broke my heart. I could have responded, could have stood up, demanded attention, announced my accomplishments in a voice that would carry across the room. I could have pulled out my phone and shown them the email from the Met, the contract with Cartier, the auction results that would make my father's real estate deals look like pocket change. But that wasn't how power worked. Not real power. Real power didn't need to announce itself. I stayed seated. I kept my expression neutral, and I watched as my family celebrated their victory in a war they didn't realize they'd already lost. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Ashford, this is the Vogue photography team. We're in the venue for some pre-publication shots. The EIC wanted us to capture you in your natural environment. We'll be discreet." I looked up, scanning the crowd. Near the entrance, a woman with a professional camera was speaking to one of the event coordinators. She caught my eye and gave a small nod. They were here. Vogue was here, and they were watching everything. They thought the laughter would be the worst part of the night. It wasn't. The remainder of the gift exchange passed in a blur of expensive wrapping paper and performative gratitude. I sat at my table, Lily's hand still in mine, and watched my family bask in the approval of people who measured worth in dollar signs. Nobody apologized. Nobody acknowledged the dismissal. In my father's world, humiliation of lesser family members wasn't cruelty. It was simply the natural order of things. Around 9 o'clock, I excused myself to use the restroom. I needed a moment away from the noise, the laughter, the constant reminder that my presence here was tolerated rather than welcomed. I was washing my hands when my phone rang. The same unfamiliar number as before. "Ms. Ashford." A woman's voice, professional and calm. "This is Miranda Chen from Vogue. I apologize for calling during your event, but the editor-in-chief has a time-sensitive question about the piece." "Of course. She's wondering if you'd be willing to do a brief interview tonight. Just a few minutes for some additional quotes. Our photographer is already there, and she thought it might add authenticity to capture you in a social context." "Where?" "There's a private lounge on the second floor. We've arranged access. Would 20 minutes work?" "I'll be there." I returned to the ballroom. Something had shifted. The photographer from Vogue was no longer by the entrance. I spotted her near the stage speaking with one of the event organizers, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Claire!" My mother appeared at my elbow. "What's going on? Margaret Whitmore just asked me about an interview." "I don't know what you mean." I walked away before she could ask more questions, heading for the stairs that led to the second floor. Behind me, I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath as she returned to my father's side. The private lounge was quiet and elegantly furnished. The editor-in-chief herself was there, a woman I recognized from industry events. "Claire." She extended her hand. "It's wonderful to finally meet you in person." "Thank you. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. When we learned about the gala, it seemed like an opportunity to capture something authentic. Though I must admit, the social dynamics here are fascinating." "The dynamics are what they are. I imagine they'll change significantly when this piece is published." She gestured toward a small seating area. "Shall we?" The interview lasted 30 minutes. She asked about my process, my inspirations, the philosophy behind the Meridian collection. She didn't ask about my family, didn't probe into the obvious tension that had played out in the ballroom below. She was interested in me, my work, my vision, my contribution to the field. When we finished, she stood and shook my hand again. I want to be transparent with you, Claire. This piece is going to generate significant attention. We've decided to move the publication date up. I suspect the next few weeks will be quite different for you. I'm prepared. Are you... She looked at me with something that might have been compassion. I've seen what happens when people step out of the shadows. It can be disorienting, especially when the people closest to you haven't been paying attention. I've been preparing for this for a long time, I said, whether I knew it or not. She nodded and said goodbye, and I made my way back downstairs. The ballroom had shifted again in my absence. Small clusters of people were gathered in conversation, but the energy was different now, charged, uncertain. I saw my father standing near the bar with a group of men, but he wasn't talking. He was watching the door I'd just emerged from. Our eyes met across the room. In that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before on my father's face: uncertainty. Not anger, not dismissal, not the practiced condescension he usually directed my way. Just confusion about something he couldn't quite identify. He started to move toward me, but before he could cross the room, a staff member appeared at my elbow. "Ms. Ashford," she spoke quietly, respectfully. "They're ready for you." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. "Thank you." I followed her toward a side door, aware of my father's gaze tracking my progress, aware of Marcus craning his neck to see where I was going, aware of my mother's hand pressed against her chest in that gesture she made when things weren't going according to plan. Lily was still at our table watching everything with wide eyes. I caught her attention and mimed a quick phone gesture, "I'll text you," before disappearing through the door. The hallway beyond was quiet, a stark contrast to the noise of the ballroom. The staff member led me to a small office where the Vogue photographer was setting up equipment. "Just a few shots," she said. "Nothing formal. We want to capture you in the moment." I stood where she indicated and let her work. The camera clicked, recording evidence of something my family had refused to see for 15 years. When I finally returned to the ballroom, the gala was winding down. Guests were starting to leave, exchanging air kisses and promises to do lunch. My father was still at the bar, but now he was alone, staring into a glass of scotch. I collected Lily and headed for the coat check. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, muted and uncertain. "Claire, wait." I didn't wait. They thought the night had already peaked. I knew it hadn't even started. The next morning, the calls began. Not from my family. They were still processing, still trying to understand what had happened at the gala. No, these calls came from people whose names I recognized from industry publications, from gallery openings, from the invisible network of collectors and curators who existed in a world my father had never entered. "Claire, darling," heckled the director of a prestigious gallery in Chelsea, calling from her car. "I just heard about the Vogue piece. Tell me there's something left for my spring show." "We'll talk," I said. "I've been following your work for years, the Meridian collection." She sighed theatrically. "Utterly transformative. When the article is published, you're going to be impossible to reach." "I'll still be reachable. You say that now." She laughed. "Call me before the chaos." The chaos was already beginning. My email inbox had tripled overnight, filled with inquiries from collectors, requests for interviews, invitations to events I'd spent years being excluded from. By noon, the trickle had become a flood. I took Lily to school, then returned to my studio to work on the Dubai commission. The familiar rhythm of metal and fire helped center me, helped me remember that underneath all the attention, I was still the same person who'd spent 15 years learning her craft in obscurity. At 2 o'clock, my mother finally called. "Your father wants to see you." "I'm busy." "Claire," her voice was strained, "please. There's been some kind of people are calling, asking about you. He doesn't know what to tell them." "Tell them the truth, or don't tell them anything. It doesn't matter to me." "How can you say that we're your family?" I set down my tools and took a breath. "You're my family. And for 30 years you've made it clear that my work wasn't worth your attention. Now other people are paying attention, and suddenly you want to be involved. That's not fair. It's completely fair. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, will you at least come to dinner tomorrow? We can talk about this like adults. I'll think about it. I hung up before she could press further. The Vogue article was published the following morning, 2 days earlier than originally scheduled. I learned later that the editor-in-chief had moved up the timeline after seeing the photographs from the gala, something about capturing a moment of emergence that would be lost if they waited. I read it over coffee, Lily reading over my shoulder. Claire Ashford has spent 15 years building one of the most respected names in contemporary jewelry design, and she's done it almost entirely in the shadows. Her work, which combines traditional techniques with innovative design principles, has been acquired by museums on 4 continents and private collectors from Hollywood to the Middle East. The Meridian Diamond Collection, currently on display at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, represents 4 years of work and carries a reported valuation of $20 million. $20 million, Lily breathed. That's what your diamonds are worth. That's what they're insured for. Mom, she looked at me with something like awe. Why didn't you tell me? I thought I had. I thought you knew what I did. I knew you made jewelry. I didn't know, she gestured at the screen. This. The article continued detailing my training, my process, my philosophy. It included photographs from my studio, from museum exhibitions, from private collections around the world, and toward the end, a paragraph that I knew would be the one my family focused on. Despite her considerable achievements, Ashford has maintained an almost obsessive privacy about her personal life. She declined to discuss her family background, saying only that she preferred to let her work speak for itself. I'm not interested in the story of where I came from, she said during our interview. I'm interested in what I've created. By 10 o'clock, the article had been shared thousands of times. By noon, the story was a fixture in the online news cycle. By 3 o'clock, when I arrived at my parents' house for the dinner, I'd reluctantly agreed to the entire world had been introduced to a version of Claire Ashford that my family had never bothered to see. My father opened the door himself, unusual, since they had staff for that. Claire. He looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes, deeper the confident set of his shoulders, slightly diminished. Come in. The house was quiet. No guests, no events, no performance of Ashford grandeur. Just my parents, Marcus and Helena and me. Where's Lily? My mother asked. With a friend. I thought this conversation should be just family. We gathered in the formal living room, the space where my father conducted business meetings where important things were decided. I'd rarely been invited here as an adult. Well, my father cleared his throat. I've read the article. So have a lot of people. $20 million. He said the words carefully, as if testing their weight. For jewelry. Marcus made a sound that might have been disbelief. Helena was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Why didn't you tell us? My father asked. It was the same question he'd asked before, but something in his tone had shifted. Less accusation, more genuine confusion. I did tell you. Years ago. You weren't interested. I was interested. I just didn't. He stopped rubbing his forehead. I didn't understand. No, you didn't want to understand. There's a difference. The silence stretched. I watched my family struggle with information that didn't fit their established narrative, watched them try to reconcile the daughter they'd dismissed with the woman described in Vogue. The editor-in-chief called me personally, my father said finally. After the article was published, she wanted to know if I had any comments. What did you tell her? That I was proud of you. He looked away. I don't know if she believed me. I didn't know either. Marcus spoke for the first time. I did some more research. After the gala. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. You've been working with Cartier. Your designs are in the Smithsonian, the Dubai royal family. He shook his head. Honestly, I still think there must be some kind of mistake with the valuation. Why would you keep that secret? It wasn't a secret. It was just my life. But we're your family. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. The golden child, the successful one, the inheritor of everything my father had built. For 30 years he'd held that position without challenge, and now, overnight, the hierarchy had shifted. "You're my family," I agreed, "but you've never been interested in my life. You've been interested in how I compared to you. Those are different things." The room went quiet again. My mother had tears in her eyes. My father was staring at his hands. And Marcus. Marcus looked like a man who had just realized the game he thought he was winning had been played on an entirely different board. "What happens now?" Helena asked, breaking the silence. I stood. "Now I go home to my daughter, and you all figure out what kind of relationship you want to have with the person I actually am instead of the person you assumed I was." I left without looking back, but I heard my father's voice quiet and uncertain as I reached the door. "I had no idea." "No," I thought. "You didn't." The aftermath of the article was everything Dominic had predicted and more. My wait list, which had been comfortably long before, tripled in the first week. Galleries that had been casually interested became urgently competitive. Interview requests piled up faster than I could decline them, and I declined most of them. The work was what mattered. The attention was just noise. But in my family's world, attention was everything. I learned from mutual acquaintances that my father had been fielding calls from business associates, charity board members, and social connections who suddenly wanted to know about his talented daughter. The questions were innocent enough. "How long has she been doing this? Why haven't we heard of her before?" But I could imagine how they landed on a man who prided himself on knowing everything about his family's public image. He didn't know. That was the answer he couldn't give. Marcus, according to my mother's carefully neutral updates, had gone quiet. No more jokes about my craft hobby, no more pointed comparisons to his own achievements. He'd retreated into his work, spending longer hours at the office, avoiding family gatherings where the new topic of conversation might be his sister's sudden success. Triumph would have required caring, and I realized I no longer did. Lily noticed the change. "Mom," she said one evening, looking up from her homework, "you seem different." "Different how?" "I don't know. Lighter, maybe?" She chewed on her pencil, thinking, "Like you don't have to carry something heavy anymore." 3 weeks after the article was published, I received an invitation I hadn't expected. The Metropolitan Museum was hosting a special reception for patrons and donors featuring the Meridian collection. As the creator of the collection, my presence was requested, strongly requested, the director emphasized in her email. It would be an opportunity to speak about the work, to connect with supporters, to represent the museum's commitment to contemporary American craft. I agreed on one condition: no interviews, no press, no photographers. Just the work and the people who appreciated it. Lily helped me choose what to wear. She'd become my quiet compass. The reception was smaller than I'd expected. I recognized several faces from gallery openings and auction previews, people who nodded at me with the casual acknowledgement of longtime acquaintances. But there were also faces I didn't recognize. Two in particular stood out: a woman in her 60s with silver hair and impeccable posture, and a younger man who stayed close to her side with the attentive air of an assistant. They approached me near the end of the evening. "Claire Ashford," the woman extended her hand. "I'm Marguerite Duval. I've been collecting your work for almost a decade." "I know who you are." Marguerite Duval was one of the most respected collectors in the world, known for her early identification of talent and her willingness to support artists before they became famous. "I'm honored." "The honor is mine. Your work has been a cornerstone of my collection for years." She smiled. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever step out of the shadows." The shadows were comfortable. They usually are. But you weren't meant for them. She glanced around the room at the pieces displayed under museum lighting. "This collection represents something important, a bridge between tradition and innovation, between craft and art." She looked back at me. "Have you ever considered teaching? There's a program I found at the Rhode Island School of Design, master classes for emerging artists. Your technique's the way you blend historical methods with contemporary vision." She shook her head. "It would be invaluable." I thought about the years I'd spent learning the mentors who had shaped my skills, the knowledge that had no value unless it was passed on. I'd be interested in talking more about that. Wonderful. She handed me a card. Call me next week. We'll discuss the details. As she walked away, I noticed a familiar figure near the entrance. My father stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable in surroundings that didn't respond to his usual currency of real estate deals and social connections. He was alone, no mother, no Marcus, no entourage of admirers. I crossed the room to meet him. Dad. Claire. He looked around at the museum walls at my work, displayed like something precious. Your mother told me about the reception. I thought... He stopped recalibrating. I wanted to see it for myself. What do you think? He was quiet for a long moment. Then I don't understand most of it. The techniques, the history. It's not my world. He met my eyes. But I can see that it matters. That it's real. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to receive. Thank you for coming. I have a lot of questions, he said. About how you got here, what I missed. He paused. I know I don't deserve answers. No, you don't. He nodded, accepting that. But I'll give you some anyway, I continued. When you're ready to listen. Really listen. I'd like that. I wasn't sure I believed him. 30 years of history suggested that listening had never been his strong suit. But something in his expression was different tonight, a humility I'd never seen before. I was just finally strong enough to find out. They didn't lose face because of what they said. They lost it because they had nothing left to say. The weeks after the museum reception were marked by a strange kind of silence from my family. Not the cold silence of estrangement, but something softer, a collective pause while everyone recalibrated their assumptions. My father called twice, both times to ask questions about my work that he clearly didn't understand but was trying to. My mother sent texts with articles about jewelry design links to exhibitions she'd heard about tentative offerings that felt like peace negotiations. Marcus said nothing. This wasn't unusual. My brother and I had never been close, but his absence from the family communication channels was conspicuous. No group texts sharing photos of his latest vacation. No humble bragging about business deals. Just silence. I learned from my mother that he'd been going through some things. What those things were, she didn't say, and I didn't ask. My own life had settled into a new normal. The initial surge of attention after the Vogue article had stabilized into a steady stream of opportunities, meaningful ones, the kind that would have seemed impossible a few months ago. The teaching program Marguerite Duval had mentioned was moving forward with plans for my first masterclass in the spring. A documentary filmmaker had approached me about a piece on traditional metalworking techniques, and the Dubai commission was nearly complete, each wire perfect, each joint invisible. Lily thrived on the new stability. She'd started telling her classmates about my work, no longer embarrassed by a career that had seemed vague and unimpressive compared to the corporate achievements of other parents. My mom's jewelry is in museums, she told me she'd said, with the matter-of-fact pride of a child stating something obvious. The greatest change was internal. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't wake up wondering what my family thought of me. I didn't feel the low-grade anxiety that had been my constant companion since childhood. I was free. The first real contact from Marcus came 6 weeks after the Vogue article in the form of a text message that read simply, "Can we talk?" I stared at those words for a long time. My brother wanted to talk. In 30 years, I could count on one hand the number of meaningful conversations we'd had. I texted back, "When tomorrow? Lunch. I'll come to Brooklyn." The fact that he was willing to come to my neighborhood, a place he'd mocked for years, told me this wasn't a casual request. "Fine," I replied. "There's a diner on 3rd Avenue. I'll text you the address." He arrived 15 minutes early, which was unlike him. Marcus was always precisely on time, never early or late. "Claire." He stood when I approached, an unusual gesture of politeness. "Thanks for meeting me. You're early." "I know." He sat back down, fidgeting with a sugar packet. "I've been practicing what I wanted to say. I thought I'd get here before I lost my nerve." This was not the Marcus I knew. The Marcus I knew didn't lose his nerve about anything. I sat across from him and ordered coffee from the waitress who'd been serving me for 5 years. "So talk." He was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. Then, "I read the Vogue article, all of it. And then I did what I should have done years ago. I actually looked at your work. And I don't understand most of it. The technical stuff, the historical references." He shook his head. "But I understand numbers. I understand valuations and market positioning and reputation." He met my eyes. "What you've built is extraordinary, by any measure." "Thank you. I'm not saying that because I want something from you." He leaned forward. "I'm saying it because I've spent my whole life competing with you, and I only just realized you were never competing back." I let that sit between us. It was true, and we both knew it. "I was so focused on being Dad's golden child," he continued, "that I never stopped to wonder what you were doing. You were just—" he made a dismissive gesture. "The artistic one, the impractical one, the one who didn't understand how the real world worked. But you were building something real while I was just managing what Dad handed me." His voice was bitter, self-directed. "Ashford Holdings is his legacy. I'm just the custodian. You—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "You made something that's entirely yours." I hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected my brother to see clearly enough to recognize what he'd been missing, what he'd been doing wrong. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I owe you an apology, a real one." He looked down at the table. "Every joke I made, every dismissal, every time I let Dad belittle you without saying anything." He shook his head. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The words hung in the air. 30 years of rivalry, of dismissal, of feeling like the lesser sibling, and now this. An apology I'd never thought I'd receive. "I don't know if that changes anything," Marcus added. "I know you don't need my approval, you never did, but I wanted you to know that I see it now, what you are, what you've accomplished." I studied my brother, really studied him maybe for the first time in our adult lives. He looked tired. The confidence that had always seemed so effortless now seemed like a mask that was slipping. "What happened to you, Marcus?" "What do you mean?" "Something changed. You're not the same person you were at the gala." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Helena and I are separating." "What?" "She said I was—" He laughed a hollow sound. "She said I was so focused on looking successful that I forgot to actually be present. In my marriage, in my life." He looked at me. "Sound familiar?" It did. It sounded exactly like our father. "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. "Don't be. It's probably the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me." He pushed away his untouched coffee. "I just thought you should know that seeing what you built made me realize what I hadn't, and I'm trying to figure out if it's too late to change." We sat in silence for a while. The diner bustled around us, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the 30-year rivalry that was finally quietly ending. "It's not too late," I said finally. "How do you know?" "Because you came here, because you apologized, because you're asking the question." I reached across the table and for the first time in as long as I could remember, took my brother's hand. That's how change starts. His eyes were bright when he looked up. "I don't expect us to be close," he said. "I know I don't deserve that, but I'd like to try to be better, to be the kind of brother I should have been all along." "Then try," I said. "That's all any of us can do." When I left the diner an hour later, something had shifted. Not resolution that would take years if it came at all, but possibility. The possibility of a family that could learn from its mistakes, that could grow beyond its worst patterns. It wasn't everything, but it was more than I'd had before. My father called the next morning. "I'd like to talk," he said, "properly, just the two of us." I'd been waiting for this call. "All right. Dinner, I can send a car. I'll come to you tomorrow evening." I arrived at the Greenwich house at 7 o'clock sharp. My father opened the door himself again and led me to his study. The power seat was empty. Tonight he sat in one of the guest chairs. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know this isn't easy." "Nothing about our relationship has been easy." "No." He looked older than I remembered. "It hasn't." I waited. "I've been thinking," he began, "about why you never told me, about your work, your success, and I've realized that you did tell me, more than once." He shook his head. "I just didn't listen." "You didn't want to listen. There's a difference." "Yes, there is." He was quiet for a moment. "I had a story in my head about who you were, the impractical daughter, the one who didn't understand business. I was wrong about all of it. Yes. I don't know how to apologize for 30 years. You can start by not trying to manage this conversation." I kept my voice even. "You asked me here because you want something, understanding, maybe, or forgiveness." I leaned forward. "But I'm not here to give you anything. I'm here because you're my father, and I wanted to see if there was anything left to build on." The bluntness seemed to catch him off guard. "Is there," he asked, "anything left? I don't know yet." He nodded slowly. "What would you need from me?" I'd thought about this. "I need you to accept that my work matters, not because it makes money, though it does, but because it's an expression of something important. Craft, tradition, beauty." I paused. "I need you to stop comparing me to Marcus." "I've already stopped. You need to mean it. Not just say it because it's what I want to hear." "I mean it." His voice was quiet. "Marcus came to see me yesterday. Told me about your lunch. I spent 40 years trying to make that boy into a copy of myself." He shook his head. "And now he's falling apart because he realized he doesn't know who he is when the performance stops." "That's not entirely your fault." "Yes, it is." He stood moving to the window. "I tried to make you both into versions of myself. And when you didn't fit, I decided you were broken, instead of considering that maybe the mold was wrong." This was more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from my father. "Words are easy," I said. "Actions take longer." "I know." He turned back to face me. "I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to do better. To learn about your life, your work, your daughter." "Why now?" "Because I'm 72 years old, and because I realized watching you at that museum reception that you've built something that will last." His voice cracked. "I want to know what that's like." We talked for 2 more hours. Not about business, not about family hierarchy. We talked about my work, how I'd started, who my mentors had been, what I hoped to accomplish. He asked questions I'd never expected him to ask, questions that showed genuine curiosity rather than veiled criticism. When I left, he walked me to the door. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve." "You're welcome." I paused. "But Dad, this is the last conversation on your terms. From now on, if you want to be part of my life, you come to mine." He nodded. "I can do that." I wasn't sure he could. 30 years of patterns didn't change overnight, but something in his expression made me think he was going to try. And trying, I'd learned, was where change began. As I drove back to Brooklyn, my phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "How did it go?" I smiled and typed back, "Better than expected. We'll talk when I get home." Her response was immediate. "Okay, I made cookies. The burnt ones are mine." I laughed out loud alone in the car. My daughter with her burnt cookies and her fierce loyalty and her quiet understanding. She was the reason any of this mattered. She was the future. Everything else was just the past finally being put in its proper place. The invitation came 3 months after the Vogue article forwarded through my professional contacts rather than family channels. A charity auction in Manhattan benefiting arts education programs in underserved schools. My work had been requested for donation a piece from the Meridian collection, which would be the centerpiece of the evening's offerings. What caught my attention was the co-host, Marcus. My brother had thrown himself into philanthropy since his separation from Helena, seeking a new identity outside the business achievements that had defined him for so long. The arts education charity was his latest project, and apparently it was genuine. Multiple sources confirmed he'd been quietly donating both money and time for months. I agreed to donate the piece and attend the event. The venue was a converted warehouse in Chelsea, its industrial bones softened by warm lighting and carefully curated art. The crowd was different from my father's galas, younger, more diverse, connected by passion for the arts rather than social obligation. Marcus found me near the entrance, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "You came." "I said I would." "I know, but—" He shook his head. "I wouldn't have blamed you for staying away. These events aren't exactly your style." "The cause is good. And you asked." He smiled a real smile, not the performance version I'd grown up watching. "Thank you. It means a lot." We walked through the venue together, Marcus pointing out pieces he'd helped select programs the charity was funding. His enthusiasm was genuine, untinged by the competitive edge that had characterized everything he did for as long as I could remember. "You're different," I observed. "I'm trying to be." He stopped in front of a student artwork displayed among the professional pieces. "Did you know I can't name a single thing I'm good at that wasn't handed to me? Business skills learned from Dad. Connections inherited. Even my hobbies are basically networking opportunities." He touched the frame of the student painting. "I'm 42 years old, and I'm just now figuring out who I am. Those years aren't wasted if you learned something from them." He considered this. "You sound like a therapist." "I've had a lot of therapy." He laughed, and for a moment we were just two siblings sharing a joke instead of competitors measuring each other. The auction began at 8. I watched from a corner table as various pieces were presented, bid upon, celebrated. The energy in the room was different from the cold calculation of fine art auctions here. People seemed genuinely excited to support the cause. When my piece came up, the room shifted. "Our final item," the auctioneer announced, "is a piece from the Meridian collection by Claire Ashford, donated by the artist herself." The spotlight found me in the crowd. I nodded acknowledgement, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its necessity. "This piece represents the culmination of years of study in traditional metalworking techniques," the auctioneer continued, "combined with a vision that critics have called transformative. The starting bid is $50,000. The bidding escalated quickly. 50 became 75, then 100,000, then 200. I watched as people I didn't recognize competed for something I'd made with my own hands. When the hammer finally fell at $350,000, the room erupted in applause. Marcus appeared at my side. "That was incredible." "It's for the kids." Still, he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I used to think success was about accumulation. Money, properties, status symbols." He shook his head. "But you just gave away something worth more than my car, and you look happier than I've ever seen you." "Because it's not about what you keep. It's about what you create." "You won't end up like Dad." "How do you know?" "Because you're having this conversation. Dad never would." The evening wound down, guests departing with auction prizes and promises to support next year's event. I stayed until most people had left, helping Marcus oversee the final details with a competence that surprised me. "You're good at this," I said, "organizing things, caring about things. It looks good on you." He ducked his head, embarrassed by the praise. "I'm learning." When I finally left, Marcus walked me to my car. "Claire," he stopped on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. "I know I can't undo 30 years of being a lousy brother, but I want you to know I'm proud of you, not because of the money or the recognition, but because you became exactly who you were supposed to be, despite all of us." I hugged him. It was awkward. We'd never been the hugging type of siblings, but it felt right. "We have time," I said, "to figure out what kind of family we want to be." "Do you really think so?" "I think we get to choose. That's the whole point." He nodded, and I could see him fighting back tears. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on us. Thank you for finally showing up." I drove home through the city lights, thinking about all the ways my family had changed in the past few months. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was. But it was better. We were better. And for the first time, I could imagine a future where being an Ashford wasn't something to escape from. It was something to redefine. 1 year after the gala, where my father called me poor mom with cheap gifts, I stood in my studio surrounded by the evidence of a life fully lived. The Meridian Collection had begun its tour of international museums, carrying my name, Claire Ashford, to places I'd only dreamed about when I started this journey 15 years ago. Lily was 13 now, growing into a young woman with her own opinions, her own ambitions. She'd started taking pottery classes, discovering her own connection to handmade objects and the satisfaction of creation. "Mom," she said one evening, studying a piece of my recent work, "why didn't you give up? When Grandpa was being terrible, when nobody believed in you, why did you keep going?" I considered the question. It deserved a real answer. Because the work was worth doing regardless of whether anyone else valued it. Because giving up would have meant letting other people's limitations become my own. I touched the metal surface I'd been shaping, and because I believed that someday the truth would speak for itself. Did it? Eventually. My father had kept his promise. Over the past year, he'd visited my studio multiple times, asking questions about techniques and traditions he didn't understand but was trying to appreciate. He'd attended my RISD presentations, sitting in the back row with my mother, watching his daughter teach the next generation of artists. He hadn't transformed into a different person. He was still Richard Ashford, opinionated, status-conscious, occasionally frustrating. But he'd created space for a version of me he hadn't been willing to see before, and that was enough. Marcus had moved forward with his charity work, eventually stepping back from day-to-day operations at Ashford Holdings to focus on causes he actually cared about. His divorce from Helena had been finalized, but he'd emerged from it less bitter than I'd expected, more focused, more genuine. "I think I finally understand what you meant," he'd told me recently, about creating something instead of just managing what someone else built. It changes everything. My mother remained my mother, complicated, conflict-averse, still learning how to show up for people without protecting them from hard truths. But she'd started asking about my work and started listening when I talked about it. Progress was slow, but it was real. A few weeks before the anniversary of the gala, I received an unexpected letter, handwritten on expensive stationery from my father. "Claire, I'm not good at apologies. You know this. I've spent my life believing that strength meant never admitting wrong, that admitting wrong meant weakness. You've shown me something different. You've shown me that the strongest thing a person can do is stay true to themselves when everyone around them is pushing in a different direction. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand your world, but I understand that I underestimated you, dismissed you, caused you pain that I can't take back. I'm sorry for that, truly. I'm proud of you. Not because of what you've achieved, though that's remarkable, but because of who you've become. You're the best of this family, Claire, the one who found her own path and walked it regardless of what any of us thought. Thank you for giving me another chance. I'll try to deserve it. Dad." I read the letter 3 times, then I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer alongside the photographs of my earliest work and the rejection letters from galleries that had since competed for the chance to show my pieces. Evidence of a journey, evidence of survival, evidence of a truth that had finally been allowed to speak. That evening, Lily and I had dinner together, just the two of us, at the diner on 3rd Avenue, where so many important conversations had taken place over the years. "So," she said, dipping a fry in ketchup, "any advice for me about life, about family, about all the stuff you figured out?" I thought about it. Don't let anyone's opinion of you become more important than your opinion of yourself. Work hard at things that matter to you, even if nobody else understands why. And remember that family isn't just about shared blood. Sometimes it's the people who witness your truth and choose their place in it. She nodded, solemnly absorbing this. "Anything else?" "Yes." I smiled at her. "Always make your own cookies, even if they're burnt." She laughed, and the sound filled the diner with warmth. I sat with my daughter and felt peace. They didn't lose me. They lost access to me. And when they finally learned to see me clearly, to value me for who I actually was, that's when I chose to let them back in. If you've ever been the invisible one in your own family, the one whose achievements went unnoticed, I see you. Your story matters. Your gifts matter. You don't have to wait for recognition. Keep building, keep creating. Either way, you'll have a life that belongs entirely to you. Thank you for walking this journey with me.